Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Priscilla, a native English speaker, and tonight I'll be reading about Sojourner Truth. Today is February 22nd, 2022. So 22222. I'm going to send this to our Facebook group as well. And I want to thank all of you who will watch the live stream. I also want to thank those of you who will watch the replay. We will start in about 50 seconds. So those of you who are watching from Facebook, you can click the link that is posted and you will see it live, or you could just watch it on the Facebook page. You get to choose how you wish to watch today. I'm just making sure that it is live, and it is live on Facebook. I'm going back to YouTube. So thanks everybody for joining me. Now I will open up the document. It is live streaming. This is when, if you have a virtual assistant or someone that can help you get all of those things connected, but because I have to do them, it just takes about a minute to make sure that everything is connected and playing as it should. And here we are with Sojourner Truth, the Libyan Sibyl. This is written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, and it is being read by me. Many years ago, a few readers of radical abolitionist papers must most often have seen the singular name of Sojourner Truth. Announced as a frequent speaker at anti-slavery meetings and as traveling on a sort of self-appointed agency through the country. I had myself often remarked the name, but never met the individual. On one occasion, when our house was filled with company, several eminent clergymen being our guests, notice was brought up to me that Sojourner Truth was below and requested an interview. Knowing nothing of her but her singular name, I went down, prepared to make the interview short, as the pressure of many other engagements demanded. When I went into the room, a tall, spare form arose to meet me. She was evidently a full-blooded African, and though now aged and worn with many hardships, still gave the impression of a physical development which in early youth must have been as fine a specimen of the torrid zone as Commonwealth's celebrated statuette of the Negro woman at the fountain. Indeed, she so strongly reminded me of that figure that when I recall the events of her life, as she narrated them to me, I imagine her as a living, breathing impersonation of that fine work of art. I do not recollect ever to have been conversant with anyone who had more of that silent and subtle power which we call personal presence than this woman. In the modern spiritualistic phraseology, She would be described as having a strong spear. Her tall form as she rose up before me is still vivid to my mind. She was dressed in some stout grayish stuff, neat and clean, although from the dusty travel. On her head, she wore a bright madras handkerchief, arranged as a turban after the manner of her race. She seemed perfectly self-possessed and at her ease. In fact, there was almost an unconscious superiority, not unmixed with a solemn twinkle of humor in the odd, composed manner in which she looked down on me. Her whole air had at times a gloomy sort of drollery, which impressed one strangely. "So this is you," she said. "Yes," I answered. "Well, honey, the Lord bless you. I just thought I'd like to come and have a look at you. Yo's heard of me, I reckon," she added. "Yes, I think I have. You go about lecturing, do you not?" "Yes, honey, that's what I do. The Lord has made me a sign unto this nation, and I go around a testifying and showing on them their sins against my people." So saying, she took a seat, and stooping over and crossing her arms on her knees, she looked down on the floor and appeared to fall into a sort of reverie. Her great gloomy eyes and her dark face seemed to work with some undercurrent of feeling. She sighed deeply and occasionally broke out, "Oh Lord, oh Lord, oh the tears and the groans and the moans, oh Lord." I should have said that she was accompanied by a little grandson of 10 years, the fattest, jolliest, woolly-headed little specimen of Africa that one can imagine. He was grinning and showing his glistening white teeth in a state of perpetual merriment, and at this moment broke out into an audible giggle, which disturbed the reverie into which his relative was falling. She looked at him with indolent sadness and then at me. "Laws, ma'am, he don't know nothing about it. He don't. Why, I've seen them poor critters beat him and abused and busted and hunted, brought him all torn, ears hanging off, all in rags, where the dogs been a-biting at him." This set off our little African puck into another giggle in which he seemed perfectly convulsed. She surveyed him soberly, without the slightest irritation. "Well, you may bless the Lord you can laugh, but I tell you, I won't no laughing matter." By this time, I thought her manner so original that it might be worthwhile to call down my friends, and she seemed perfectly well pleased with the idea. An audience was what she wanted. It mattered not whether high or low, learned or ignorant. She had things to say and was ready to say them at all times and to anyone. I called down Dr. Beecher, Professor Allen, and 2 or 3 other clergymen who, together with my husband and family, made a room full. No princess could have received a drawing room with more composed dignity than Sojourner had with her audience. She stood among them, calm and erect, as one of her own native palm trees waving alone in the desert. I presented one after another to her, and at last said, "Sojourner, this is Dr. Beecher. He is a very celebrated preacher." "Is he?" she said, offering her hand in a condescending manner and looking down on his white head. "You dear lamb, I'm glad to see you. The Lord bless you. I loves preachers. I'm a kind of a preacher myself." "You are?" said Dr. Beecher. "Do you preach from the Bible?" "No, honey, can't preach from the Bible. Can't read a letter." "Why, Sojourner, what do you preach from then?" Her answer was given with a solemn power of voice peculiar to herself that hushed everyone in the room. When I preaches, I has just one text to preach from, and I always preaches from this one. My text is, when I found Jesus. Well, you couldn't have a better one, said one of the ministers. She paid no attention to him, but stood and seemed swelling with her own thoughts, and then began this narration. Well, now, I just have to go back and tell ye all about it. You see, we was all brought over from Africa, father and mother and I, and a lot more of us. And we was sold up and down and hither and yon. And I can't remember when I was a little thing, not bigger than this ear, pointing to her little grandson, how my old mammy would sit out of doors in the evening and look up at the stars and groan. She'd groan and says I to her, Mammy, what makes you groan so? And she'd say, matter enough, child. I'm groaning to think of my poor children. They don't know where I be, and I don't know where they be. They looks up at the stars, and I look up at the stars, but I can't tell where they be. Now, she said, child, when you're grown up, you may be sold away from your mother and all your old friends and have great troubles come on you. And when you has these troubles come on you, you just go to God and he'll help you. And says I to her, who is God anyhow, mammy? And she says, why, child, you just look up there. It's him that made all them. Well, I didn't mind much about God in them days. I grew up pretty lively and strong and could row a boat or ride a horse or work around and do most anything. At last, I got sold away to a real hard master and missus. I tell you, they was hard, peered like I couldn't please them at all. And then I thought, what my old mammy told me about God. And I thought I'd got into trouble, sure enough, and I wanted to find God. And I heard someone tell a story about a man that met God on the threshing floor. And I thought, well and good, I'll have the threshing floor too. So I went down in the lot and I threshed down a place real hard. And I used to go down there every day and pray and cry with all my might, of praying to the Lord to make my master and missus better. But it didn't seem to do no good. And so I says one day, oh God, I've been asking ye and asking ye and asking ye for all this long time to make my master and missus better. Ain't you don't do it? Ain't you can do it? Is there any reason you haven't done it? Why maybe you can't? Well, I shouldn't wonder if you couldn't. Well, now I tell you, I'll make a bargain with you. If you'll help me get away from my master and my missus, I'll agree to be good. But if you don't help me, I really don't think I can be. Now, says I want to get away, but the troubles just be here. If I try to get away in the night, I can't see. And if I try to get away in the daytime, they'll see me and be after me. Then the Lord said to me, get up 2 or 3 hours before daylight and start off. And says I, thank you, Lord. That's a good thought. So I got up about 3 o'clock in the morning and I started and traveled pretty fast till when the sun rose. I was clear away from our place and folks and out of sight. And then I began to think I didn't know where to go. So I knelt down and says I, well, Lord, you started me out and now please to show me where to go. Then the Lord made a house appear to me and he said to me that I was to walk on till I saw that house and then go in and ask the people to take me. And I traveled all day and didn't come to the house till late at night. But when I saw it, sure enough, I went in and I told the folks that the Lord sent me, and they was Quakers and real kind they was. They just took me in and did for me as kind as if I'd been one of them. And after they'd given me supper, they took me into a room where there was a great tall white bed, and they told me to sleep there. Well, honey, I was kind of scared when they left me alone with that great white bed, because I never had been in a bed in my life. It never came into my mind they could mean me to sleep in it. And so I just camped down under it on the floor. And then I slept pretty well. In the morning, when they came in, they asked me if I hadn't been asleep. And I said, yes, I never slept better. And they said, why, you haven't been in the bed. And says I, laws, you didn't think of such a thing as my sleeping in their bed, did you? I never heard of such a thing in my life. Well, you see, honey, I stayed and lived with them. And now just look here. Instead of keeping my promise and being good as I told the Lord I would, just as soon as everything got going easy, I forgot all about God. Pretty well don't need no help. And I get up praying. I lived there 2 or 3 years. And then the slaves in New York were all set free. An old master came to our home to make a visit. And he asked me if I didn't want to go back and see the folks on the old place. And I told him I did. So he said, if you just get into the wagon with him, he'd carry me over. Well, just as I was going out to get into the wagon, I met God. And God says, oh God, I didn't know as you were so great. And I turned right around and come into the house and sat down in my room, for it was God all around me. I could feel it burning, burning, burning all around me and going through me. And I saw I was so wicked. It seemed as if it would burn me up. And I said, oh, somebody stand between God and me, for it burns me. Then, honey, when I said so, I felt as if it was something like an umbrella, which is an umbrella, that came between me and the light. And I felt it was somebody that stood between me and God. And it felt cool, like a shade. And I says, who's this that stands between me and God? Is it old Cato? He was a pious old preacher, but then I seemed to see Cato in the light, and he was all polluted and vile like me. And I said, is it old Sally? And then I saw her, and she seemed just so. And then says I, who is this? And then, honey, for a while, it was like the sun shining in a pail of water when it moves up and down. For I began to feel it. 'Twas like somebody that loved me, and I tried to know him. And I said, I know you. I knows you. I knows you. And then I said, I don't knows you. I don't knows you. I don't knows you. And when I said, I knows you, I know you. The light came. And when I said, I don't know you, I don't know you, it went just like the sun in a pail of water. And finally, something spoke out in me and said, this is Jesus. And I spoke out with all my might and says, this is Jesus? Glory be to God. And then the whole world grew bright, and the trees, they waved and waved in glory. And every little bit of stone on the ground shone like glass. And I shouted and said, praise, praise, praise to the Lord. And I began to feel such a love in my soul as I never felt before, love to all creatures. And then all of a sudden it stopped. And I said, there's the white folks that have abused you and beat you and abused your people. Think of them. But then there came another rush of love through my soul. And I cried out loud, Lord, Lord, I can love even the white folks. Honey, I just walked around and round in a dream. Jesus loved me. I knowed it. I felt it. Jesus was my Jesus. Jesus would love me always. I didn't dare tell nobody. It was a great secret. Everything had been gotten away from me that I ever had. And I thought that if I let white folks know about this, maybe they'd get him away. So I said, I'll keep this close. I won't let anyone know. But Sojourner, had you never been told about Jesus Christ? No, honey, I hadn't heard of him, not through preaching, been to no meeting. Nobody hadn't told me. I'd kind of heard of Jesus, but thought he was like General Lafayette or some of them. But one night there was a Methodist meeting somewhere in our parts, and I went, and they got up and began to tell these experiences, and the just one began to speak. I started because he told about Jesus. Why, says I to myself, that man found him too. And another got up and spoke, and I said, he's found him too. And finally I said, why, they all know him. I was so happy. And then they sung this hymn. Here Sojourner sang in a strange cracked voice, but evidently with all her soul and might, mispronouncing the English, but seeming to derive as much elevation and comfort from bad English as from good. There is a holy city, a world of light above the stars and regions, built by the God of love, an everlasting temple, and saints are raised in white. They serve their great Redeemer and dwell with him in light. The meanest child of glory outshines the radiant sun, but who can speak the splendor of Jesus on his throne? Is this the man of sorrows who stood at Pilate's bar, condemned by haughty Herod and by his men of war? He seems a mighty conqueror who spoiled the powers below and ransomed many captives from everlasting woe. The host of saints around him proclaim his work of grace, the patriarchs and prophets and all the godly race, who speak of fiery trials and tortures on their way. They came from tribulation to everlasting day. And what shall be my journey? How long I'll stay below? Or what shall be my trials? Are not for me to know. In every day of trouble, I'll raise my thoughts on high. I'll think of that bright temple and crowns above the sky. I put this whole hymn because Sojourner, carried away with her own feelings, sang it from beginning to end with a triumphant energy that held the whole circle around her intently listening. She sang with the strong barbaric accent of the native African, and with those indescribable upward turns and those deep gutturals which give such a wild, peculiar power to the Negro singing, but above all, with such an overwhelming energy of personal appropriation that the hymn seemed to be fused in the furnace of her feelings and come out recrystallized as a production of her own. It is said that Rachel was wont to chant the Marseillaise in a manner that made her seem for the time the very spirit and impersonation of the gaunt, wild, hungry, avenging mob which rose against aristocratic oppression. And in like manner, Sojourner, singing this hymn, seemed to impersonate the fervor of Ethiopia, wild, savage, hunted of all nations, but burning after God in her tropic heart and stretching her sacred hands toward the glory to be revealed. Well, then you see, after a while, I thought I'd go back and see the folks on the old place. Well, you know, the law had passed that the colored folks was all free. And my old missus, she had a daughter married about this time who went to live in Alabama. And what did she do but give her my son, a boy about the age of this year, for her to take down to Alabama. When I got back to the old place, they told me about it, and I went right up to see old missus and says I, Missus, have you been and sent my son away down to Alabama? Yes, I have, says she. He's gone to live with your younger missus. Oh, missus, says I, how could you do it? Pa, says she, what a fuss you make about a little nigger. Got more of them now than you know what to do with. I tell you, I stretched up. I felt as tall as the world. Missus, says I, I'll have my son back again. She laughed. You will? You nigger? How are you going to do that? You ain't got no money. No, missus, but God has, and you'll see, he'll help me. And I turned round and went out. Oh, but I was angry to have her speak to me so haughty and so scornful, as if my child wasn't worth anything. I said to God, oh Lord, render unto her double It was a dreadful prayer, and I didn't know how true it would come. Well, I didn't rightly know which way to turn, but I went to the Lord and I said to him, "Oh Lord, if I was as rich as you be, and you was as poor as I be, I'd help you. You know I would. And oh, do help me." Ain't I felt sure then that he would? Well, I talked with people and they said I must get the case before a grand jury. So I went into the town when they was holding a court to see if I could find any grand jury. And I stood around the courthouse, and when they saw me, I was a coming out. I walked right up to the grandest looking one and I could see, and I says, I to him, "Sir, be you a grand jury?" And then he wanted to know why I asked. And I told him all about it. And he asked me all sorts of questions. And finally he says to me, "I think if you pay me $10, that I'd agree to get your son for you." And says he, pointing to a house over the way, "You go along and tell your story to the folks in their house, and I guess they'll give you the money." Well, there I went and I told them, and they gave me $20. And then I thought to myself, if $10 would get him, $20 would get him sartain. So I carried it to the man, and he says, "Take it all, only be sure and get him." Well, finally they got the boy brought back, and then they tried to frighten him and to make him say that I wasn't his mammy and that he didn't know me, but they couldn't make it out. They gave him to me, and I took him and carried him home. And when I came to take off his clothes, there was his poor little back all covered with scars and hard lumps where they flogged him. Well, you see, honey, I told you how I prayed to the Lord to render unto her double. Well, it came true. For I was up at old Mrs. House not long after, and I heard him reading a letter to her, how her daughter's husband had murdered her, how he'd thrown her down and stamped the life out of her when he was in liquor. And my old missus, she gave a screech and fell flat on the floor. Then says I, "Oh Lord, I didn't mean all that. You took me up too quick on my request." Well, I went in and tended that poor critter all night. She was out of her mind, a crying and calling for her daughter. And I held her poor head on my arm and watched for her as if she'd been my baby. And I watched by her and took care of her through her sickness after that. And she died in my arms. Poor thing. All right, so this will be the end of the reading for this evening. I want to say to those of you who are watching the live stream on YouTube, thank you so much for being here. For those of you who are able to watch the replay, thank you for watching the replay. If you choose to leave a comment, I will be happy to respond. I will be here again tomorrow night reading about the histories, the trials of African Americans. I'm Dr. Priscilla, a native English speaker, and I live in the US. Thank you very much.